Good afternoon and welcome to the ITT Tech Crime Lab, where down the road you'll be spending a lot of time in your criminal investigation and your forensics classes. Today we're going to be working on Chapter 11 in your textbook, Criminology Today. Hopefully you access the ebook and read the chapter. There's a lot of really interesting information with regard to crimes against property, including burglary, shoplifting, the different typologies of people involved in these types of crimes. And I think you'll find it very interesting. At the same time, you don't want to forget to look at the textbook website that is located at this website. You see the or at this URL up here. That one will get you right to it if you can't get to it through my website, cjresources.org. And remember, what you want to do each week, go into the chapter and take the quizzes. Now, our quiz this week will be on crimes against persons, which is what we talked about in class last week. So you want to go into this website and do the multiple choice and true-false questions, and you should review the discussion questions as well, because I may use one or more of those for an essay question, extra credit essay question on your quiz. And later on, there will be several extra credit essay questions on your final as well, and I strongly suggest that you go in and take a look at these. So let's get to slideshow. It is definitely, I think it's shorter than some of the other ones we've had, so stick with me here and we'll see how it goes. So first we're going to start out looking at thieves and a definition of types of people. Again, criminologists like to put all these people into different categories based upon studies they have done, based upon their behavior, based upon their life course of crime. So you have a variety of definitions that are going to pop up in this particular chapter. Now, remember also that at the end of your textbook, and some of you actually have the physical copy of this textbook because I gave it to you. If you don't have one, I still have like 4 copies that you're welcome to have if you're one of those people who doesn't like the ebook. But in the back of the textbook, there is a glossary which has the definitions of all the different words that we talk about. So on this particular slide, we're looking at professional criminals. That's somebody who actually makes a living from their criminal pursuit. Other offenders will look up to them. This might be your Ocean's 11, Ocean's 12, Ocean's 13 kind of people. I'm actually going to show you in class, hopefully, if the device works for us this week, some professional criminals, well-known professional criminals, art thieves. There's people that do crimes as part of their regular, that's their career. That's what they do. A persistent thief is someone who continues in common law property crimes despite no better than an ordinary level of success. So it's somebody who just keeps doing it, but maybe they're not doing it really well, if you get my meaning. All right. Now, other definitions: offense specialization. This is when someone does just one thing. They say, well, I'm a car thief. And it might be your Fast and Furious kind of thing. You know, I'm a car thief. That's what I do. I steal bicycles. I rob banks. You know, those kind of things. Cafeteria style offending is, you think about if you've gone into a cafeteria where there's some type of buffet. You know, if we were a traditional college or university, you'd know from like going to the student center, you get to pick whatever it is that you want. So cafeteria style offending is when you have people who they don't necessarily plan what it is they're going to do. They just to do a variety of things. You know, whatever happens to suit their needs. This could be, it's suggested by some studies, this is what gang members do and the kind of offenses that they commit. But there are some other criminologists that suggest that there are plenty of other people who are not in gangs who offend in this particular matter. So they may shoplift one day, they may break into a car another day. They're doing a variety of different things. And then your occasional offender is someone who may not be doing it frequently, but they're guided primarily by the opportunities that presents them. So their ethics aren't that great. So that may be your fellow student who, if you leave your computer or your iPad or whatever, your phone, laying on a desk somewhere, they'll pick it up. If you leave, whether it be a flash drive or a hard disk or whatever, you leave something in one of the classrooms, you forget it. You may never see it again. For the occasional offender, that's be their opportunity. I think I told you the story of the young man I locked up many years ago who probably started out as an occasional offender, but then he started doing it over and over and over again, and it made it basically his life course was offending. But the occasional opportunity that presented himself was his initiation into the crimes. So a criminal career is basically all the different things that go through a criminal's life course. And you have a very detailed definition here, talking about integrated dynamic structure of sequential unlawful acts that advances in the wider context of causal and correlative influences. And you look at all the different types of origins, from biological, psychological, informal, social, formal criminal justice origins, etc. And you're talking about what is it that takes Johnny Jones from this step to that step to that step and building his criminal career through various stages. And those stages are the break-in period. As I mentioned, the young man that I was involved with many years ago in Mount Laurel, his break-in period, he just started doing things, started committing minor crimes, and was just building up. And that's a period they say in the studies, it could be up to 12 years. Somebody starts when they're 18, and their break-in period is that first 12 years up to like the age of 30, when the studies show what we call a stable period. This is when the person is most active in their criminal career, and they're most into their criminal career. So that's what they do. And I could give you an example. We locked up a few burglars, 3 brothers, who what they did on a regular basis, aside from some minor contracting I believe that they did, is they burglarized houses. And they were all in their 30s. So that was their stable period, which is what they did as their way to make money. And then the burnout phase, you can think about when the person starts to, say, decelerate or desist, maybe not commit as many crimes, and eventually not be committed as much to committing crimes. We did say that your majority of your offenders age out at like 25, but we do have property offenders who stay in the game a lot longer, but ultimately most of them do have a burnout phase. And in the film that we're going to watch in class this week, we're going to see examples of that. Now, I'm not going to tell you what it is because I'm going to surprise you. I have a couple of different ones in mind, and hopefully they'll be to your liking. And of course, if Colin or anybody else has suggestions, of course you got to watch this video for you to even know that I'm asking for suggestions. Let me know if you know of a really good one that fits, property crimes, burglars, their progression through the life. I have a couple of really good ones in mind. Some are a lot of property crime and with some violent crime thrown in. Some you may have seen, you may not have seen, but good examples. So property offenders and rational choice. We all know that rational choice theory suggests that people in their, people in their committing of crimes make a choice. Well, some of the studies suggest that we do have some rational choice among offenders in property crimes, but in like burglars, it's limited because most of your burglars are not professional criminals, so they don't put a whole lot of effort. There's not a whole lot of thought process going into it, but at least they think that they're making their own decision and choices. They might not have all the information they need to make a good, informed decision, but they're making one. That's why they call it partial and limited, not total. Limited temporal rationality. And your book goes into a lot more details. Like I said, you need to read the text, and do your highlighting and all that kind of cool stuff. so that you can remember this material, because some of your other courses later on will build upon this material. And as you go in your careers, the understanding of this material could be very helpful in what you do later on. So we will look at specific types of crimes and some of the typologies about them. Larceny and theft, as you recall from the UCR definition, is simply the unlawful taking, carrying, leading, or riding away a property from the possession or constructive possession of another. So it's basically taking stuff from people, or not necessarily from them directly, but there's no force involved against the person. So larceny and theft, I have my phone sitting here, I walk out of the room, somebody else walks in the room, and they like it more than I do, and they take it. That would be a theft. Doesn't involve force or other means of illegal entry. Most people aren't as frightened when they get their stuff, like say, stolen from their car, although some state statutes of theft from a car is a burglary. But you're not as scared if somebody steals your purse or steals your wallet or steals your phone or whatever that you left somewhere. It's not as frightening as if you come home and your house is tossed from a burglar. And it is definitely a crime of opportunity. How often does it occur? Well, larceny and theft is the most frequently, if you look at the UCR, the largest number of crimes in this country are from larceny and theft. Theft from motor vehicles, which I mentioned already, is the largest category. When I started as a police officer in the early 80s, especially after I moved up to Mount Laurel, thefts from motor vehicles were rampant. I mean, it was like people would come into town, and it was like going to the mall, because they would go to the apartment complexes where you'd have a crap load of cars parked, and they would just go through and open as many of them they could. Things like pocket picking and purse snatching, they're fairly rare. Theft from large structures like buildings actually create more losses than small personal thefts, but over 1/3 of all losses from larceny and theft are under $50, which that means there's a whole lot of stuff happening, because some of us have lost more. I think I mentioned from this very room, I had an iPad stolen, which cost me about $300-400 at the time. So, if you look at the average, they say 1/3 under 50. I was part of the 2/3 that are above 50. Theft on college campuses. Hey, like right here, most frequent crime on college campuses. Like I said, I had my iPad stolen. My son, in his first semester down at Rowan University, had a bicycle stolen. Data shows us that university staff, like me, are at the highest risk, followed by faculty. So that was there's differentiating between, say, office workers, administrators. They're at a higher risk, and then the faculty is at the next highest risk, and students are the lowest rates. Obviously, somebody studied that. Whether that is totally accurate today is another matter. But I guess university staff, being in a specific offices, specific locations, being in the same place every day, and being more likely to bring more property with them, are going to be a greater risk. Where faculty, you may have an office. That office is secure when you're not there, so it's not as likely that somebody's going to steal something from you unless you leave it in the classroom. And of course, students are very mobile, and that might be the difference there. How the campus is designed has been determined to be a major thing as far as the theft rates, the differences in theft rates. So people who are responsible for security at college campuses would want to look at what is the design that facilitates less crime. Motor vehicle theft. Well, probably everybody understands the theft or attempted theft of a motor vehicle. Automobiles, cars, are the most commonly stolen type of vehicle. Other types might be, trucks, tractor trailers, other motorized vehicles. The UCR is specific with regard to what's included, what not included. But say a motorcycle would be a motor vehicle. But cars are the most commonly stolen. And probably know that every year there's an organization that puts out a list of the 10 most popular vehicles stolen in our country. And Honda Civics are similar vehicles. Honda is very popular for some reason. So if you have a Honda Civic, you want to watch out for it. Probably because the parts are so. We're going to talk about part theft in a moment. But the car is so ubiquitous and the parts are pretty much interchangeable. We also found in my community, when we talk about theft of vehicle parts, that when they came out with, I believe it's Acuras, and they had a really special headlight system on the Acuras, people would come out and steal the headlight systems from the Acuras and install them on their Hondas. Or they would take them to a chop shop or to a junkyard and sell them because people were looking for them, and of course it was a very expensive part. So if you could get a second-hand part, it was much cheaper. And as we know from looking at the UCR, motor vehicle theft, because of its frequency, because of our importance of motor vehicles in this country, it has been given special focus in the UCR. It has its own separate category from other types of theft. Largest percentage of vehicles are stolen from a parking lot or a garage. So it's not as likely that it's going to be stolen from your single-family home driveway. But if you live in an apartment complex or you're parked at the mall, that is quite possible. You're in a parking garage in the city, those types of things. I just saw in the news today, when it wasn't necessarily a stolen vehicle, it was actually a carjacking of a person down in Center City. I believe it was a doctor at one of the hospitals down in Center City. So it definitely happens. And it's highly reported crimes, because when somebody takes your car, you're probably going to report it, as opposed to somebody breaking into your car and taking the change out of your ashtray. You're probably not going to tell anybody about that. Maybe a friend, some schmuck took my change out of the ashtray. But if somebody actually takes your car, you're probably going to report it. And most of the thefts, or a significant percentage, are taken usually at or near where the victim lives. Why do people steal cars? Well, for the purpose of joyriding, taking them for a ride. I think I mentioned years ago, actually it was probably like 1985 or so, when I had first started as a police officer, one of the cases I had to investigate was that a gentleman's old pickup truck was stolen from the front of his house. Now, this was a condominium community, so there were a whole lot of cars there because it was, very densely populated. And they took his pickup truck in the middle of the night, and then drove it through a park, drove it over top of a man-made hill, and then eventually dumped it into a man-made pond, which we found. We found it in the pond the next day, and thank goodness, apparently it wasn't, the motor didn't get damaged too much, where the gentleman had his vehicle back and was still operating it within the next week. So joyriding, it's usually young people, teenagers, taking a car for a ride. You leave your car, you run into the 7-Eleven or the Wawa or wherever to get a pack of cigarettes, and you don't bother to shut your car off. Somebody might take it for a ride, and you find it 3 blocks away. Maybe it was temporary transportation, very similar. But here you got somebody who actually needed a ride. They're walking by the 7-Eleven, the Wawa, they see you get out to get your cigarettes, and hey, there's a car, it's running, I need to get a mile down the road, here, I'll just take this car and dump it off. Used in a crime. Many years ago, again, in my community, we had people who would steal cars, and they would drive them to the suburbs where I was. They would then burglarize the homes, and then they would take a car from the neighborhood and leave the stolen car in the neighborhood. So that was used for kind of like a combination of temporary transportation and using it in a crime. Then you have other people who might steal a vehicle to use in, say, a robbery. Because then, if you go in and rob a bank, or you rob a convenience store, or whatever, and you drive off in a vehicle, people are getting a description of that vehicle, giving it to the police are looking for that vehicle. Well, you probably want to dump that car right away and steal something else, so they're no longer looking for you. So that's one of the reasons why you might steal a vehicle to use it in a crime. And of course, stripping is when we take the parts. In a lot of cases, the vehicle is worth more for the parts than it is for a whole vehicle. And it kind of depends on what that vehicle is, how popular that vehicle is, how many other people in the country. Like I said, the Honda Civic, very popular. Not necessarily for people to take the Civic and then have their own car to drive around. I would suggest or assume that a lot of these cases are cars that are stolen for the purpose of stripping them for parts. Which brings us to the thefts of car parts. Like I said, car parts may be worth a lot. If any of you have taken the time to fix your own vehicle, you know that parts can be very expensive. Or even taking it to the shop, you got the part cost and the labor cost. Very expensive to fix a vehicle. But if you're in a situation where you can't really afford to fix the vehicle or to buy the parts legitimately, getting stolen car parts could be very helpful to you. Like one of our fellow students right now has a busted rim on her vehicle, and she can't afford it. Well, it could be very much cheaper to go to, say, a junkyard or a similar place and to buy a new rim there. Now, she's not going to know where that rim came from, but it's quite possible that someone else could have stolen it. Or, and this happens periodically, is people might actually need something, and like a wheel, and this is because these are very easy to do. And I'm not saying you should do it, but this is very easy to do. Is you go around a neighborhood at night, you look for a car just like yours, you jack it up, you take the wheel, and you drive away. You got your problem taken care of. Parts are easy to sell. Parts are harder to identify than entire cars. Now, if I take 4 wheels off of a car, there's probably not one of those VIN numbers on the wheels, especially if they're like aftermarket. And this is another thing that gets stolen really frequently. Like I said, external parts are the most frequently stolen items. You put some nice wheels, nice rims on your car, and somebody else likes them too, you might walk out and find your car up on cinder blocks when in the next morning. That's why they have some special crime prevention devices. You have those special lug nuts that you need a special key for. Were very popular, at least in the 80s and 90s. I don't know if they're used as much today, but that was supposed to prevent people from doing that very thing. Joyriders, like I said, people taking a ride for fun. I already told you the story. It's usually groups, not just like one kid walking around, hey, I want to steal a car. It's usually a bunch of them, hey, let's go for a ride. It's expressive, has no value. It's just like fun, emotional. And usually they dump them afterwards, sometimes after crashing them. And it's all over. Jockeys, this is somebody who is taking a car for order. There are actually car theft rings that ship vehicles overseas, and they may be out looking for very specific vehicles. So the jockey car thief is one who is given the order. Go find me a 2015 BMW whatever. Now we have somebody that wants it. Or maybe there's a certain type of vehicle that's very popular in a certain country. Somebody wants a certain vehicle, vehicles to order. It's very costly, less common than thefts for other uses, a lot of planning and calculation involved, and not recovered very often. Lowest, because they're shipping them away, they're sending them somewhere, they're maybe removing the VIN plates, they're re-registering them in different names, they might be painting them, they're doing all kinds of things to make it really hard. It's not like, when you steal a car and you park it in front of your house without doing anything to it. These professional thieves are actually, making an effort. All right, shoplifting and employee theft. Now we know we all have it. We have an expert in the room that could chime in on this in class, and I look forward to that. The data, and again, this slide deck was put together in 2009, so I don't know what the data is right now, but I'm sure we can get some anecdotal stories from the world that you're in, because it could be different in other places. But according to the data that these people collected a few years ago, and I'm sure it's still collected on a regular basis, the employee theft causes more loss to retailers than shoplifting. So the people that are actually working in the store are stealing more, maybe higher end items. They're able to somehow get away with it, and it costs the stores more than the individual who walks in off the street. Certainly, whatever you do to combat shoplifting could impact sales. If I have to lock up certain things and I need to ask somebody permission, or somebody has to go get me a key before I get this item, maybe I'm going to walk away. Maybe I'm going to think, you know what, I ain't got time for this. An example, we were just in the store the other day. I believe it was Walmart. Actually, it was my wife, my son, and I. And we had separated. Kid was walking off doing something. My wife and I were together, and she decided we got to go to the video game aisle and find a certain thing that he had ordered. Well, of course, it's a Wii U game, and it was locked in a cabinet, and there's nobody around. So she needed to go find somebody to come and open the cabinet so she could buy this thing. And it took like 15 minutes before she actually got the guy to come over. So it's like, we want to prevent shoplifting, but at the same time, depending on how elaborate your security is and how hard it is to get somebody to open these cages, you might lose some sales. Now, technology, as we know, technology is getting better and better and better. Different things that we can put on, devices that can be put on. Some are as thin as a sticker, can be put onto various types of products, and could set off an alarm if somebody's trying to get out of the building with it. Of course, one of the pain in the butt is if the store clerk, the checkout person, forgets to shut it off, and you're walking out the door with your legitimately purchased product, and the alarm goes off. That happens to me at Home Depot all the time because they always miss. If I'm buying tools, they a lot of times miss the security tags that are on them. All right, so who does shoplift? Juveniles are overrepresented. Most of your shoplifting is kids. It does occur in all social classes, but more common in lower income. Not committed primarily by women. However, I would disagree with that. A lot of my experience in the suburbs is you have a lot of young girls. And if you look at the textbook talks about the different typologies, which we're going to look at them in a moment, but the textbook actually describes them for you. And one of the lower level typologies is usually young teenagers and usually female. One of the several forms of deviant behavior during adolescence might be a gateway offense to more serious and chronic types of offending. And how's that going to happen? Well, if I shoplift and I get away with it, maybe I'm likely to go in and do another one. And maybe I want some more valuable property that I can't get through shoplifting, and maybe I commit a robbery, maybe I commit a burglary, whatever. So it could be a gateway offense. Don't know if the data supports that or not, but it's possible. Some typologies. Cameron had boosters and snitches, and Moore had impulsive shoplifters, occasional shoplifters, episodic shoplifters, and amateur and semi-pro shoplifters. So, and if you look in your textbook, it goes into what are all those people, who are they? And that would be on page like 453, 454, talks about the different types of shoplifters. So, boosters were a small percentage of people, usually sold their items that they stole. Snitches were novice shoplifters. If you look at Moore's, you got impulsive, inexperienced, rarely planned, occasional, a little bit higher level. They did it on an occasional basis. Amateur were our largest group in his study. More than half of the sample. It was a fairly regular activity, and they were trying to maximize profit and minimize risk. Semi-professionals, shoplifting was an integral part of their everyday lives. That's how they made a good part of their money. So I would read through this section of the chapter. I don't want to read all of it to you, but it gives you an idea of what these people found as far as who shoplifters are. And their typologies are similar. Obviously, Cameron only had 2. Moore has 5. McShane and Noonan had 3. They call them the rebels, the reactionaries, enigmas, and the infirm. Rebels were usually younger females that had history of offending. Reactionary, similar to rebels, but they often had, they were actually often able to pay. Enigmas, older and slightly more likely to be male. And the elderly, or infirm, would be elderly, and for some reason more likely to be female. So you have an elderly female who's going in and stealing stuff out of the store. That's McShane and Noonan's infirm. And I should mention, there is a significant amount, and their studies, they don't talk about it that much, but if you look in the book, you'll find it. There's a significant amount of shoplifting gets done to support people's drug habits. And I encountered quite a lot of that in my tenure in the suburbs. You had people that would come in sometimes from Camden, sometimes from other places, and go into our stores and shoplift so that they could then trade it for drugs later on. We talk about the people that make the money, or the people who take this property. One of those is what you call your avocational shoplifter, who might be the person who is taking the stolen property in return for whatever service that they normally provide. All right, let's look at burglary. Burglary, as we know, is an unlawful entry of a structure to commit felony or theft. Some states actually include vehicles in this definition, but the UCR does not. So you have to actually go into a structure, which could be a house, could be a commercial building, could be a store. Usually residential burglaries do not involve direct confrontation between victim and offender, but can cause fear and lasting effects, because people, and I experienced this a lot with the people I dealt with in my community, because I did a lot of follow-ups on burglaries, and people were scared. Somebody violated their personal space. Somebody violated their house, and that scared them, because they would always think, well, what if I was here? And today, our alarm companies, the companies that sell alarm systems, they prey upon that fear, because they actually show in their commercials usually a woman home alone with a burglar breaking into the house and then encountering her, which scares the crap out of everybody, and they want to buy alarm systems. That type of situation is fairly rare, but the fear is definitely legitimate. Commercial burglaries could, depending on how serious it is, could make a business go out of business. So what's the social ecology of burglary? We've looked at various theories, one being routine activity theory. And in the case of routine activities theory, you have a motivated offender, like the guys I talked about earlier, who did a lot of burglaries. The three brothers did a lot of burglaries in my community and some of the other nearby communities. They were very motivated. So then they have to find a suitable target. So we have a house in a community where there's probably going to be stuff that's worth some money. And maybe there's not an alarm system. There's nobody home. That's your absence of capable guardians. So burglary, very, very attached to this routine activities theory. Because in every burglary, you have that motivated offender, you have the target, and you have, you don't have a cop sitting in front of the house. Maybe you don't have an alarm system. Nobody's home. Burglary can be affected by changes in technology, production and distribution of services, population structure. Just changes the layout of the game and how they can get in. Maybe the technology provides better security systems. Maybe as far as commercial burglaries, depending upon how things are produced and distributed, you may have communities that no longer have large warehouses for people to break into. Those types of things. So, Shover suggested that there were 3 levels of burglars, and these are pretty easy to figure out. You have your low-level burglars, and maybe they do it once in a while. Middle range, a little bit more often, and making a little bit more money out of their deal. And then you have your high-level dealers, or high-level burglars, which we're going to look at. Now, your high-level burglars are your oceans people, and I'm going to show you some art thieves and some diamond thieves. These are high-level people. They're professional, and they make a lot of money doing their thing. Where your average burglar is more likely the low-level person who is a target of opportunity. Middle range, again, those people that are making a decent living out of it, but not your big timers. Where do we do burglaries? Well, burglary, really very simple. A burglary has to be done. For it to be a burglary, it's generally done when there's nobody around, right? So when would you do a residential burglary? Residential burglary, generally done in the daytime. If it's done at nighttime, it's obviously more serious, because there's more likelihood that you could run into somebody if you're doing a burglary at a house at nighttime. The opposite is true for commercial property. Commercial properties are usually occupied during the day and not occupied at night. So if I try to do a burglary in a commercial property during the daytime, which to me is kind of silly, unless of course you're doing it on a day that you think they're closed and you're wrong. But again, they're serious. Burglary generally considered a cold crime, although I think the technology, especially with DNA and AFIS systems as far as fingerprinting, we have a lot of evidence. The old idea is that burglary is a cold crime is you don't have a lot of evidence to link the offender. And also the fact that it's cold in the fact that you don't find out about it until it's over. Where, say, a robbery might be considered a hot crime because people get robbed, they call the police right away. Where a burglary, a burglar hits your house at 10 o'clock in the morning and you come home from work at 5:30, that's really cold by then. But as far as evidence, there's a lot more evidence that's available. And Bucks County just recently started a DNA database for the entire county. Ben Salem initiated it. Ben Salem has the largest investment in it. But what they do is they collect DNA swabs from people that they arrest in these communities, people that are involved in minor crimes, and then they have officers trained to collect DNA evidence from the crime scenes. And they've been able to use this DNA evidence from the crime scenes to match up people that they had arrested previously. So now we're taking this cold crime and we're coming up with new ways to investigate. What's the motivation of burglars? Usually fast cash, money. It's something that's well known, less risky than doing a robbery, less risky than trying to jack somebody on the street, because you never know who you're dealing with. You may not have, and they say they may not have the necessary equipment for robbery. What's the necessary equipment for robbery? Well, if it's a strong arm robbery, you got to be in good shape, probably. Otherwise, you need a knife or a gun. Well, you're going to do a burglary, you might need a tool, screwdriver or something, and maybe not, because a lot of people don't secure their homes. A lot of people leave doors and windows unlocked, leave doors open, especially in the summertime. They leave windows open for ventilation, not thinking that somebody's going to crawl through it. So it's a little bit easier to do a burglary because sometimes you don't need anything except yourself. Target selection. If we're doing a commercial burglary, we're looking at, is it going to be something I can get into? Is it suitable for my needs? Retail's more liked or preferred because usually you have merchandise that's wide open. A lot of times you can see it from, if you go into one of these strip malls and you look inside, can you see all the stuff? Yeah. There's been some really high-level burglaries of telephone, wireless stores, the Apple stores. And if I can find it, there's a really interesting video of a burglary of the Apple store in Marlton, New Jersey a few years ago, where these guys went in and they knew exactly what they wanted, and they ripped it right off the countertops and left. Now, how did they know? Well, they went in when the store was open, and they ID'd where everything was, and then later on they came in at night and they took it all. Now, certainly the stores, after a theft like that, after a burglary like that, the stores are more careful with how they secure their stuff at night after they're closed. And, of course, that costs more. Any of these crimes cost the establishments more because they now have to take extra measures to secure their property. Because, yeah, they put an alarm system. The Apple store in Marlton had an alarm system, but if you got guys who already know exactly what they want, they smash out the glass, they run in the store, they grab what they want, they're out the door, sometimes even before the police know the alarm went off. And by the time the police get there, they're long gone. Residential burglaries, sometimes it's knowledge of the occupants. If you're, let's say you have a friend who comes to your house all the time and they know you got a lot of cool stuff, and they come back when nobody's home and rip off your stuff. I know lots of people that have been targeted that way. Maybe it's a tip. Maybe your friend talks to somebody else. Hey, I've been hanging around so-and-so's house, and they got this and they got that, and you know what? They're never home on Tuesdays, and that person takes that tip, and they go and do it. Or you just have somebody who's driving through the neighborhood and sees a potential target. Like, some burglars will just case neighborhoods. You'll drive through the neighborhood at dusk, and you'll see which house where the lights don't come on. And it's highly likely that there's nobody home. Now, we had a really interesting scenario happen in Mount Laurel a number of years ago. Is somebody did exactly that. They sat in a neighborhood, and they looked for whichever house, after it got dark, whichever house the lights didn't come on. It was about 6 o'clock, so it must have been like the beginning of wintertime. 6 o'clock, it's dark. Guy decides to break into the house. He goes upstairs into the master bedroom, and much to his surprise, the homeowner was taking a nap. And he wakes up like, well, what the hell are you doing in my house? And then the burglar's out the door. So that didn't work out for him. He had no knowledge of the property. He had no knowledge of the occupants. He just saw this house that looked like, hey, looked like there's nobody home. I'm going to break into it. Which, from a crime prevention perspective, thinking about crimes of place, ecological theories of crime, those types of things, what would be a good idea? Well, maybe you have a timer that turns a light on when it gets dark so that nobody thinks that you're not home. Well, that's what my house looks like. Doesn't matter whether we're home or not. The lights are always coming on. Sometimes you have a light come on in one room, and a couple hours later that comes off and another one goes on, so it looks like people are moving around the house, especially when we go on vacation. And that's a good idea. What are some other things that people use as select targets? Again, does the house look like it's occupied or not? If you go on vacation and you got all your mail piling up at the front door, you got all your newspapers, which I don't know if any of you get newspapers, but I do. So when I go on vacation, I have to tell the newspaper company to stop the newspaper so I don't have all the newspapers piling up at my front door. I got to tell the post office to hold my mail. If I'm going to be away for a long time, I might even have to have somebody cut my grass. Because if the grass grows a lot higher than it usually is, somebody can say, hey, you know what? Ain't nobody been in that house for a while. So signs of occupancy. Whether or not there are security devices could be a factor in whether somebody selects a target. And sometimes it's just that little sign that you say, oh yeah, the Sloman shield is protecting the house. If somebody sees the sign, they're less likely to break into that house because they think it's there. So I know people who actually would just buy the sign and put the sign up without having the alarm system because the burglar wouldn't know the difference. Dogs, sometimes dogs are a preventer of crime, and other times they're not. Over the years, I've investigated or been part of situations where people had dogs in the house, and the dogs weren't really excited about defending the house. And people would say, but when I'm here, anybody comes to the door, they bark like crazy. Well, you know what? Those of you that have dogs might understand this. That dog forms a relationship with you. And your dog may not give a crap about the stuff that's in the house if you're not there. And so we've seen that. We've also seen times when the animals were fed. There was one major case years ago when I was just like a teenager. It was right around the corner from my house where they actually broke in the house and they drugged the dogs. Didn't kill them, but they drugged them. All right. Other factors, is it an accessible area? Remember CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. Is the house in an area that's more or less accessible? Is it easy to get in? Can people see where I'm going to get in? Do they have lights? I mean, there's all these different factors that you should already be aware of. All right, cost. Obviously, burglary costs a bundle of money. If somebody goes in and cleans out all your stuff, maybe your insurance company reimburses you for it, maybe not. All right, I said, I lost something here in school. It cost me some money. So somebody comes into my house and steals some stuff, costs you some money. If they steal from the iPad store or the Apple store, well, they have to replace all that. Are they going to raise their prices to cover the cost? Who knows? Across the board, they may have to. And time lost from work. If you got to go, you're getting called to go back home because somebody discovered a burglary, or you got to deal with the issues related to it. And interesting, this is a very interesting thing. You see what's on the screen here. Property crimes have a greater effect on the decision to move than violent crimes, according to the research. Now, it kind of depends. If you live in a neighborhood where you're afraid to walk out the door because of violent crime, you're probably going to try to get out. Unfortunately, people that live in that situation generally can't afford to get out. But people who are in neighborhoods where burglaries occur, burglars are looking for targets where they can actually get some good stuff. So they're going to burglarize everywhere, but people are going to be more likely, according to the data, more likely to move based upon property crimes. Certainly a connection between burglaries and drugs. Interesting thing is in the 80s, you actually had burglary rates decreasing and robbery rates increasing. And your book explains it really simple. You had a preference at that time for crimes where you can get cash really quickly. I didn't want to people who were addicted to crack, who needed their drug right away because it only was good for a few hours. They needed to get cash really quick. Maybe they didn't feel they had time to go and burglarize a house or go do a lot of shoplifting and then try to find somebody to sell this stuff to so they get their crack. They needed cash. So at that particular time, robbery rates went up while burglary rates went down. And the idea there is that it had something to do with the crack cocaine epidemic. Now, we know from talking before, this was a correlation where you had robbery rates going up, burglary rates going down, a lot of crack on the street. Was it the crack that caused it? That's what the suggestion is. Sexualized context of burglary? Well, from watching many of these commercials for these alarm systems that they try to sexualize it. You do have some cases that have sexual forces lying at the root. I don't know that there's a lot of them, but there are some. Somebody's got a fetish, the guy that breaks in to steal somebody's underwear. Voyeuristic burglary, somebody breaking in to watch what people are doing. Again, opportunity theory. If the opportunity is there, then maybe. Home intrusion rape, that's what the alarm companies want to make us think happen all the time. And there you got a case where you have somebody who's going to rape anyway. And maybe the opportunity is there if they know there's a woman home alone, or they can see because you got your shades drawn up and they can see you walking around the house in your underwear or whatever. Maybe they're more likely to come in that particular case. All right, stolen property. Again, this is a crime: possession of stolen property, receiving stolen property, depending upon the state you're in. Different definitions of the crime, but the basic elements of that crime are: you're either buying or receiving stolen property. It is stolen property, and you know it to be stolen. Now, in New Jersey, the statute basically says in order to be charged with receiving stolen property, it's assumed that if you have at least 2 items of property, that you knew was stolen. Now, some people, and we've debated this in class before, well, what if I happen to buy 2 things from a friend of mine who I had no idea, and yet the law says that if I have at least 2 items of stolen property, I'm assumed. Well, you're going to have to obviously make the case and show the origin of that property because the law is not on your side in that case. All right, offense. What's offense? Is that white picket thing that's around your house? No. Offense is somebody who actually accepts stolen property from thieves. It's one way. It's the least common way for your majority of thieves, but most common for professional burglars. They might have a regular person they go to, a regular company they go to. Cromwell said there were 3 types of receivers. It was your professional. Professional receiver is the person who what they do. They got a store set up, and they are in business to receive stolen property. Now, some people would say, at least we thought for sure, that Barracks Trading Post, there was one in Ben Salem, I understand it closed. There was one down in Maple Shade. We were always checking them for stolen property because people would steal things and we'd take it there and they'd get some money, and could never prove that those people actually were doing it professionally, but there was a lot of thought that they were. Hopefully there's nobody in class that's related to one of these guys that's going to say, well, no, that's wrong. So a professional receiver is somebody who that's what they do. They receive stolen property. Now, there's also the concept of covered and non-covered professionals. A covered professional is somebody who is receiving items that they have a store, a retail store, and the items that come in are exactly the same as what they normally sell anyway. So it doesn't look like they're doing anything out of the ordinary. A non-covered is someone who is receiving stolen property that's not consistent with what they normally sell. The avocational receiver, I mentioned that earlier, is someone who is taking stolen property in return for whatever, payments of bills. Say you're a drug addict, you steal something from a home, you take that to your drug dealer, and you exchange the stolen property for drugs. That's an avocational. So there's a lot of different people in your book. Suggest lawyers, suggest bail bondsmen, all kinds of different people who could potentially accept property. Whether or not they know it's stolen is another thing, but they accept property in return for their services. An amateur receiver, somebody who might just happen to buy something off of somebody. Otherwise, honest citizens buy stolen property. And sometimes they know. If your buddy comes to you with, say, a camera, and they say, hey, I got this really nice single lens reflex digital camera, it's got 25 megapixels, comes with a really nice lens, and I'll sell it to you for $200. You probably would know, at least I would for sure, because I know a lot about cameras, that it's likely to be stolen. If I touch it, I'm probably going to burn my fingers. So I probably wouldn't want it. But there are people who would say, hey, yeah, what the hell? Well, they say possession's 9/10 of the law, so whoever has it, I got it. The only problem is we talked about buying and selling stolen property, and some states you can actually be charged with possession of that stolen property. We don't have to prove that you actually bought it from somebody or received it from somebody. Just the fact that you have it shows that you received it from somewhere. We don't know whether you stole it yourself or you got it from somebody else. But that law allowed us to charge people, even if they were the burglars. Maybe we couldn't prove that they were the persons that stole it, but they had the property in their possession. We could charge them with that possession of stolen property. So the amateur receiver has that potential that if they buy something off of a friend or an acquaintance, or you buy something off of Craigslist, or you buy something off of eBay that's stolen, you could potentially be charged with possession of that stolen property, even if you didn't know it was stolen. You'd have to really, really fight hard to suggest that, well, yeah, okay, it's stolen. You can prove it's stolen, but I didn't know. All right, arson. I think this is the last crime we're going to talk about in our property crimes. Arson is the burning of or attempt to burn of a dwelling house, public building, motor vehicle, aircraft, or personal property of another. Different states have different range in the statute. Is it arson to burn an open field? Is it arson to set the forest on fire? In many states, that's true. It is. It doesn't have to have an intent to defraud, like in a insurance fraud. Like we had a case in my old neighborhood where I used to live, where a guy actually burnt his house down so he could collect insurance. That's pretty common around the country. You got a business that's not making any money, and you got a pretty good insurance policy on that business. You have it torched, or you torch it yourself to make some money. So, and there's a lot of motives. Like I said, profit. It could be insurance. It could be somebody torches something for a thrill. We had a guy when I was a volunteer fireman years ago who was a volunteer in both my company and a company in another town. He was eventually arrested because he set fires so he could respond to them to help put them out. That could be like a glory seeker or thrill seeker, whatever. Back in the early 90s, there were a lot of church fires, which caused the federal government to create the Church Arson Prevention Act. So there have been laws created because of this. Fire setters, who are they? Arson, majority are juveniles. Now, we just talked about insurance fraud, from burning a house, burning a business, burning a car. And we've had people who reported their car stolen, and the car wound up somewhere in the middle of nowhere on fire. And it turned out that the person who owned the car actually either paid somebody else to take it, and burn it, or they took it out themselves and burned it, and then came home and reported it stolen. Obviously, these aren't juveniles, but the vast majority, the numbers of fire setters are juveniles. And you have different groups. Under 7, usually an accident or out of curiosity. You know, how do I make? I remember playing with matches when I was a kid. I didn't burn anything, but I was like sitting behind a chair and setting off matches. You know, and my mom caught me. Of course, my mom used a lot of physical punishment back in those days. And what do you think my mom did? You set the match up, you light the match, blow it out, and then touch my hand with it. Burned me. My mother burned me, which is a whole other crime. But accidentally or out of curiosity, and it was back. I believe I was 7 or younger when that occurred, because it was when I lived in Philly. You got children between 8 and 12. Fire setting is usually a result of some type of issue, psychosocial conflict. Kids between 13 and 18 usually have been setting fires for quite some time and haven't been detected, and they just are continuing along those lines.